Welcome to this round of MTGA Tasting Notes. This is where we get into the big guns, a little bit of Cabernet Sauvignon. And in particular, this is going to be our 2017 St. Veeder Cabernet. Now, some of you who are Napa geeks probably know that there is no appellation that is St. Veeder. There is a St. Helena, there is a Mount Veeder, that's for sure. This is where we got a little creative. That 2.5 years on a marketing team definitely paid off, because we started making Cabernet from Mount Veeder in particular in 2017. We had gotten a little bit from the St. Helena area as well, but we really wanted to dial in these Mount Veeder cabs. I've had an interest in that area for a long time. It's something that is fairly unknown, I think, as a growing region. I think Howell Mountain gets a lot of hype, as does Spring Mountain, and for good reasons. Really amazing stuff coming off those hillsides, and I think Mount Veeder is, obviously right on par. There's some amazing cabs that come off that particular hillside. Now, since we also use a little bit of Cabernet from St. Helena as well as Merlot for blending purposes, this is where it gets a little nerdy. The percentage of Mount Veeder fruit that's in there is below the percentage that it needs to be in order to call it Mount Veeder. That's 85%. So since it's a little bit below that, we weren't able to call it a Mount Veeder wine. It was going to be some combination of both St. Helena and Mount Veeder, so we said, let's come up with our own cool name for it. St. Veeder was born. So this is actually a combination of both, mostly Cabernet Sauvignon. You're going to see about 81% Cabernet in this particular wine. It's going to be about 19% Merlot. And the reason for that blending is because, one, these Mount Veeder wines are, particularly Cabernet, are huge, incredibly structured, really intense, and they need to be tempered a little bit. Otherwise, all you're going to taste is tannin, and you're not going to taste it, you're just going to feel it realistically, and it's very distracting. So using a little bit of the St. Helena Merlot that we've been working with for the better part of 8 years at this point, when we were making this wine, just made all of the sense in the world. So we specifically sought out some Mount Veeder Cabernet that would jive really well with the St. Helena Merlot that we've been working with. And I think we found a really good melding between the two. In the past, our Cabernets have been as low as maybe 5 or 8%, our Cabernets have been as low as 5 or 8% Merlot blended in, and they've been up to about that 18-19% as well. It largely just depends on the year, that vintage, what Mother Nature's given us, and where those wines are going and what they need to get to this point in a bottle, ready to drink, ready to enjoy. So that's always a judgment call. And when it comes to blending this particular wine, all of our Cabernet currently is aged in 100% new oak. So we definitely go big, some darker, nicely charred barrels from a couple different cooperages to really lend itself to that nice big flavor that this Cabernet provides. And the Merlot that we blend in is generally coming from what we call our free run lots, lots that we didn't have to squeeze really hard or press really hard to get the juice out of the grapes after fermentation. It's generally considered your higher quality wine that's coming off those free run lots. And we usually have 1 or 2 of those that we age in a once used or a neutral barrel, specifically for blending purposes, because we don't want too much oak added into these wines. We didn't, as much as we love that nice toasty characteristic, when you get a little bit too close to a 2x4, it's no longer enjoyable. So you have to find that balance. And that's how we do that, is to use, a lot of new oak on this Cabernet, really balance it out and level that out. And then with the Merlot, on top of that, in a neutral or once used barrel, it has that nice kind of softness, that just richness, and a little bit of that X factor to just make this wine yummy when it's all said and done. Now, very typical of Mount Veeder Cabernet, you do get some of those nice, earthy, even kind of savory tones to it. Think of like your rosemary, like cooking on a roast chicken, like how you open up the oven for that roast chicken, you just get a blast of like rosemary, and it's just like this, it's so good. I think of my mom's home cooking, and it's just the best. And then the Merlot adds that nice kind of big pop of fruit characteristics. Now, the Cabernet is going to have those darker fruits. Think of your currants, your really kind of dense, black cherries, things of that nature. And then the Merlot is going to bring a little bit more of that blueberry, some of those red fruits along with it. Think of your, raspberry, even your like tart cherry kind of thing going on. And all these things come together to kind of create more complexity. And actually, oddly enough, even with blending in Merlot, the wine actually ends up being kind of bigger and more intense because you have just more flavor, more complexity, more characteristics floating around in there. Where if it was just Cabernet and it was just that big tannic Mount Veeder Cab, it'd be less complex. It'd be a little bit more one-dimensional and it would not be anywhere near where we want it to be when we bottle it up. So this is, when it comes to our Cabernet program, the St. Veeder Cab, this is something that we spend a lot of time really hammering out the final blend. And it's a complicated process, and we have another video on blending specifically that'll be coming out soon, if it isn't already, if you're watching this a little bit more down the road. But this is something that we'll try blending it about 3 months before bottling, do a little trial kind of test run, and then about a month out before we're going to bring it up to tank and bottle it, we'll do one final round to make sure it's right where we want it to go. And sometimes it does change. You'll tweak percentages a little bit. Even initially on this 2017 vintage, I initially pegged it at about 10% Merlot that it needed to blend and be, what we wanted it to be when we finally bottled it up. And when I revisited it about 2 months later, it needed that extra 8 or 9% when it was all said and done. So that 18-19% range, it made the wine bigger, more complex, richer, rounder, and just yummier, to be honest. That way you can pop it open and enjoy it sooner rather than later as well. This was an immensely fun wine to create. Our Cabernet is kind of year in and year out because there's all these little buttons and knobs and bells and whistles that you're playing with to really dial in exactly where you want it to be. An incredibly fun wine to make. And you definitely get all of those nice savory characteristics, those big fruit characteristics, and of course with a lot of more new oak on this particular wine, you get that really rich kind of toastiness to it. Some of those chocolatey and mocha characteristics. It even gets a little bit of that smokiness to it as well, which is really nice. And actually, speaking of that, this is 2017, as some of you might remember. We had a few fires in the area that particular year, but good news. Luckily enough for us, all of our grapes were harvested before those fires started, literally the Friday before. Oddly enough, that was our last day of harvest, was the Friday before the fire started. So we didn't have any smoke issues whatsoever. Anything that you get of that kind of toasty or smoky kind of characteristic is really well balanced, and specifically from the barrel aging that we're doing. Some of these newer barrels that we use from the likes of Gamba or Lan Fouquet, they have a lot of intensity to them, and it really helps, they're just such great additions to our Cabernet program, and how it really just exemplifies exactly what we want from this particular wine. So we hope you've had a chance to enjoy our Cabernet in the past. As always, thank you for tuning in. Be sure to check out our website for our release notices. Make sure you're on our mailing list as well. And of course, if you're enjoying our tasting notes and geeking out with some of our wines, be sure to hit the follow or subscribe button as well. Cheers.